The Galactic Conclave had been meeting for 600 years before humanity ever sent its first representative. 600 years of treaties signed without human hands. 600 years of borders drawn without human input. 600 years of wars declared, alliances forged, resources divided, and not once, not a single time, had anyone thought to knock on Earth's door and ask what the people there thought about any of it. When humanity finally made contact with the wider galaxy, not because they were invited but because a human deep space probe accidentally collided with a Vreth cargo freighter somewhere between Jupiter and the edge of the asteroid belt, the reaction from the galactic community was not excitement. It was not wonder. It was not even curiosity. It was inconvenience. Ambassador Dara Holt remembered the exact moment she stepped into the conclave chamber for the first time. She was 34 years old, a former war correspondent turned diplomat, with dark brown hair she kept pulled back tight and a jawline that her colleagues said could cut glass. She had survived 6 conflict zones, 2 assassination attempts, and 1 spectacularly bad marriage. She was not easily intimidated. But the conclave chamber intimidated her. It was enormous, a domed structure the size of a small moon, orbiting the neutral world of Calith Prime. The ceiling was made of some kind of crystal that refracted light into 1,000 shifting colors. There were hundreds of species represented around the central table. Tall, short, gaseous, solid, crystalline, aquatic. Some communicated through vibration. Some through scent. Some through light pulses in their translucent skin. And every single one of them looked at Dara Holt the way a person looks at a fly that has wandered into an important meeting. The conclave chair that day was a Vreth elder named Sorvin, a creature that stood 9 feet tall, had 4 arms, 3 eyes arranged in a triangle on a flat gray face, and a voice like grinding stone. He had been chair for 200 years. He did not stand up when Dara entered. He did not acknowledge her for 11 full minutes. When he finally spoke, it was in Galactic Common, a language humanity had learned in approximately 8 months, which the universal translators still handled with a slight delay. The human delegation, Sorvin said, will be seated in the observer section. Dara blinked. I'm sorry? The observer section, Sorvin repeated as if she hadn't heard him clearly. Row 19. Far left. You are here as observers only. Humanity has not yet been assessed for full membership status. Dara stood very still. Around her, the other delegates were already looking away, losing interest, turning back to their own conversations. A reptilian being to her left, she recognized them as a Koth diplomat, actually let out a sound that her translator rendered as a low, amused click. We received the agenda, Dara said carefully. It lists the Outer Rim resource allocation as today's primary discussion. Earth is directly affected by that allocation. Our mining operations in Row 19, Sorvin said again. Far left. There was a silence. Dara Holt took a breath. A slow one. The kind of breath that comes not from defeat but from a decision being made very quietly inside a person's chest. She nodded once. She found row 19. Far left. She sat down in a seat that was clearly designed for a species with 4 legs and no spine, because it was shaped completely wrong for a human body. She did not complain. She pulled out her notepad, actual paper, because she didn't trust galactic networks with her notes, and she began to write. She wrote down everything. Every word said. Every decision made. Every resource allocated and every border confirmed and every treaty signed. She wrote it all down. And when the session ended 6 hours later, she walked quietly back to the human diplomatic shuttle, sat down across from her aide, a 26-year-old kid named Marcus Webb who had the anxious energy of someone who had consumed too much coffee, and she said 4 words. We are going to wait. Marcus stared at her. Wait for what? Dara looked out the viewport at the conclave chamber floating in the dark of space, all crystal and light and 600 years of decisions made without humanity. For them to need us, she said. Back on Earth, the report she filed was not what the World Council had expected. They had expected outrage. They had expected demands. They had expected Dara Holt, who was famously not a patient woman, to come back breathing fire and calling for sanctions. Instead, she submitted a 47-page strategic document with a title so calm it was almost unsettling. Recommended Policy, Strategic Patience. World Council Chair Elena Vasquez read the document twice. Then she called Dara directly. You want us to do nothing? Elena said. I want us to do everything, Dara said. Just quietly. And not where they can see it. Elena was a tall Brazilian woman in her late 50s with silver-streaked hair and the kind of steady presence that had kept 6 fractious continental blocks talking to each other for a decade. She was not a person who made decisions quickly. She sat with the document for a long moment. They disrespected our representative on the galactic stage, Elena said. Yes, Dara agreed. And you're recommending we smile and say nothing. I'm recommending, Dara said, that we remember we are human, and that we have been doing exactly this, smiling and saying nothing and building something enormous underneath, for our entire history. Elena looked out her office window at the Bogota skyline. At the city that had been a war zone 30 years ago and was now one of the most beautiful urban centers on Earth. At the proof that humans could rebuild anything. How long? Elena asked. Dara's answer was immediate. As long as it takes. The Vreth filed their report on humanity with the Conclave 3 weeks later. It was not kind. Species designation, Human, Sol System, Sector 7 Gamma. Assessment level, pre-civilizational. Military threat index, negligible. Technological index, primitive. Recommended status, observation only. Notes, emotionally unstable. Historically violent toward own species. Short-lived. Physiologically fragile. No significant contribution to galactic community anticipated. Recommend minimal resource allocation to sector. The report was read aloud at the next conclave session. Dara sat in row 19 far left and wrote every word of it down. Her hand did not shake once. The problem with the Vreth assessment, and it was a problem that would not become obvious for many years, was that it measured everything humans had done and nothing about what humans were capable of doing. It measured the wars and missed the reasons wars ended. It measured the technology and missed the speed at which that technology was being developed. It measured human lifespan, averaging 70 to 90 years, and called it a weakness. What it failed to calculate was what a species does when it knows its time is limited. What it fails to understand is the specific and extraordinary pressure that mortality puts on ambition. Humans, in short, were in a hurry in a way that no long-lived galactic species had ever truly been. The Koth lived for 400 years on average. The Vreth, nearly 600. The crystalline beings known as the Salvari were effectively immortal, their consciousness transferring between mineral hosts across millennia. None of them had ever felt the particular fire that burns in a creature who knows, deeply, biologically, inescapably knows, that they have maybe 80 years to do something that matters. Dr. James Okafor understood this better than most. He was 41 years old, a Nigerian-American physicist working out of the newly constructed Lagrange Station, a human research facility positioned at the gravitational balance point between Earth and its moon. He had a shaved head, reading glasses he was always losing, and a daughter named Lily back in Lagos who sent him drawings of rockets every week. James had been working on the same problem for 11 years, faster-than-light travel. Every galactic species that had achieved FTL had done so through the use of what the Conclave called fold drives, technology that required a specific mineral called cathite, found almost exclusively in the outer rim regions that the Conclave had just, in Dara Holt's first session, allocated away from human access. The Conclave didn't think this was a problem. Humanity didn't have FTL capability. Humanity didn't have cathite access. Therefore, humanity would remain a local species, contained to their solar system, dependent on slower-than-light travel, forever asking for permission to go anywhere that mattered. It was a very tidy arrangement. From the Conclave's point of view. James Okafor had been staring at the math behind fold drives for 11 years, and 3 weeks after Dara Holt's first session, sitting in his lab at 2 a.m. with a cold cup of coffee and a drawing from Lily pinned to his whiteboard, a crayon rocket with the words "Daddy's ship" written underneath it in a child's unsteady hand, something clicked. Not metaphorically. He actually heard something click, a small sound his brain made or maybe the station's cooling system, but in that moment it sounded to James like a key turning in a lock. Because fold drives required cathite to function. But the principle behind fold drives, the actual physics, did not. The cathite wasn't powering the fold. It was stabilizing it. It was a buffer. A safety mechanism. The galactic species had been so dependent on cathite for so long that they had never bothered to ask, what if you engineered a different kind of stability? What if instead of a mineral buffer, you used a computational one? A system so fast, so precise, that it could calculate and correct fold instability in real time. James looked at Lily's rocket on his whiteboard. He picked up his pen. He started writing. He didn't sleep for 31 hours. When he finally emerged from his lab, eyes red, shirt wrinkled, the cold coffee still untouched, his research partner, Dr. Sofia Reyes, took one look at him and said, "You either solved it or you've lost your mind." "Maybe both," James said. He handed her the notes. Sophia was a compact Mexican-American woman with sharp eyes and the permanent slight frown of someone who is always thinking about three things at once. She had a doctorate in quantum mechanics and a secondary degree in materials science, and she read faster than anyone James had ever met. She read for 20 minutes without speaking. Then she looked up. "James," she said. "I know," he said. "This would work without Cathite." "I know. This would work better than fold drives." "I know." Sophia set the notes down very carefully. "Who else have you told?" "You," James said. "And I think I should tell Ambassador Holt next." Sophia nodded slowly. "We're going to need to test this very quietly," she said. "If the conclave finds out we're developing independent FTL, they'll call it a threat," James said. "Yes, I know." He picked up his coffee, looked at it, put it back down. "Good thing," he said, "that we're very good at being quiet." The message reached Dara Holt 3 days later, flagged at the highest security level humanity's diplomatic corps possessed. She read it in her office in the human delegation's modest facility on Calith Prime, a building that the conclave had provided, which was small and located in what was diplomatically called the Developing Nations Quarter, but which everyone understood to mean the section for species that didn't matter yet. She read the message twice. Then she sent one reply. "Build it. Tell no one outside your immediate team. File all reports under secondary research designations. And James, thank you." Then she went back to her notepad and kept writing. On the conclave floor, things continued as they always had. The Vreth continued to dominate. The Koth continued to position themselves as the reasonable middle power, agreeable and flexible and always somehow benefiting from every agreement. The Salvari floated serenely above most debates, ancient and unbothered. And dozens of smaller species jockeyed for favor, for resources, for recognition. Humanity sat in row 19. Dara spoke occasionally, always politely, always briefly, always in perfectly calm galactic common. She asked questions that seemed innocuous. She requested clarifications that seemed procedural. She filed motions that almost always failed and that she filed anyway because she was building a record. Because every request denied and every dismissal logged was a brick in a wall she was quietly, patiently constructing. One day, a young Koth diplomat named Thessaly, junior attaché, barely 60 years old by their reckoning, which made him practically an adolescent, took the seat next to Dara in the observer section. Not because he was required to. The Koth had full member status. But he seemed curious. "You keep coming back," he said. His translator rendered his voice as smooth and slightly musical. "Every session. Even when you are not on the agenda." "We are always affected by the agenda," Dara said without looking up from her notepad. "Your kind is very strange," Thessaly said. It didn't seem meant to be rude, more like a genuine observation. "Probably," Dara agreed. "Does it not bother you?" he asked. "Being treated as less?" Dara finally looked at him. He had 4 eyes, 2 large outer ones and 2 smaller inner ones, and they were all fixed on her with what she recognized, across the vast difference of their biologies, as genuine curiosity. "I've been treated as less my entire life," she said. "I'm a woman. I grew up poor. I covered wars in places the rest of the world didn't think were worth covering." She looked back at her notepad. "Being underestimated is the most useful condition in the universe if you know how to use it." Thessaly was quiet for a moment. "I will remember you said that," he said. "Good," Dara said. "You should." 5 years passed. To the conclave, those 5 years were a small administrative period. Barely a blink for species that measured their histories in millennia. 2 minor territorial disputes were settled. 1 new species was admitted to observer status. The Outer Rim resource allocations were renewed with minimal changes. Humanity's requests for expanded observer rights were denied twice without significant debate. To humanity, those 5 years were a revolution. Not a loud revolution. Not the kind with speeches and banners and dramatic announcements. A quiet one. The kind that happens in laboratories at 2 a.m., in shipyards hidden behind bureaucratic filing classifications, in engineering bays where the workers had signed confidentiality agreements so thorough that not even their families knew exactly what they were building. James Okafor's computational fold drive, which his team had quietly named the Holt drive in honor of the ambassador, a fact they kept entirely to themselves, had moved from theoretical to functional prototype in 18 months. An achievement that Sophia Reyes, doing the math one sleepless night, calculated should have taken a species at humanity's supposed technological level approximately 40 years. The first unmanned test was conducted in deep space, far beyond the outer edge of the solar system, where galactic traffic was sparse and human sensor arrays could track the result without observation. The probe, the size of a large refrigerator carrying nothing but instruments and a small photograph of Lily Okafor's crayon rocket, vanished from sensor range and reappeared 6 light-years away in 0.003 seconds. In the monitoring station on Lagrange, the room erupted. Scientists were hugging each other. Someone was crying. Someone else was just sitting on the floor laughing, and even Sophia Reyes, the most controlled person James had ever known, pressed both hands over her mouth and let out a sound that was somewhere between a sob and a shout. James sat very still. He was thinking about Lily. About the drawing on his whiteboard. About all the places in the universe she would now be able to go. Then he picked up his communicator and sent Dara Holt 2 words. It works. But FTL capability was only one piece. Because humanity had learned, watching 600 years of galactic politics written in other species' handwriting, that technology alone does not make a power. Power is technology plus the will to use it, plus the wisdom to know when not to, plus the network of relationships that make force unnecessary. Dara had been building that network for 5 years. Not with the great powers. Not with the Vreth, who would never see humanity as peers, or the Salvari, who were ancient beyond caring about new species, or even the Koth, who were too politically calculating to commit to a relationship with a species that the Conclave had officially rated as negligible. She built it with the small ones. The species that sat further back than row 19. The ones who had been in observer status for centuries, not because they were primitive, but because the Conclave's membership assessment process was controlled by the great powers, and the great powers had realized long ago that keeping smaller species in observer status meant keeping them without votes. Without influence. Without the ability to challenge resource allocations or trade policies or territorial decisions. There was the Pelori, a small avian species from a system 300 light-years from Earth. Feathered, quick-moving, brilliant engineers who had been in observer status for 120 years despite having faster computing systems than anything the Vreth operated. Their application for full membership had been denied 4 times. The official reason given was always some variation of further assessment required. There was the Den, aquatic, roughly the size of dolphins, from a water world called Mira. They communicated in frequencies that most galactic translators handled poorly, which meant they were perpetually misunderstood in conclave sessions. Their resource requests were denied almost reflexively because most full members simply didn't bother to understand what was being asked. There was the Oru, a fungal network species, slow-moving but extraordinarily intelligent, whose concept of time was so different from most galactic species that they were often simply ignored in debates because their communication cycle was too slow for standard session scheduling. Dara learned all of their languages. Not through translators, actually learned them. Pelori tonal clicks. Den harmonic sequencing. Oru chemical signaling, which she could not produce biologically but could communicate through a scent diffuser she wore as a bracelet, custom-built by a team of biochemists back on Earth. She met with their representatives outside the conclave chamber. In the modest restaurants of the developing nations quarter. In small parks on Calith Prime where the light came through alien trees in colors Earth didn't have names for. She listened to them. This was not standard diplomatic practice. Standard diplomatic practice involved speaking, making your position clear, establishing your interests, negotiating from defined points. Dara Holt listened. She asked questions. She remembered what she was told. And she came back, session after session, year after year, and she remembered everything. Why does she come here? The Pelori representative, a small fierce creature named Kale, asked his aide one evening, watching Dara across the park where she was sharing a meal with Den Ambassador Mirith. His aide clicked something that translated as a shrug. She seems to actually care. Kale watched for another moment. Dangerous, he said finally. A species that has been treated poorly and still bothers to care. He ruffled his feathers in a gesture his aide had learned to recognize as unease. That is a species that is planning something. He wasn't wrong. He just didn't know yet that what they were planning was a kindness. Back on Earth, the quiet revolution was expanding beyond physics. The World Council, following Dara's strategic patience framework, had reorganized Earth's external affairs in ways that were not publicly announced. Military development had been reframed and reclassified. On paper, Earth's defense budget appeared flat. In reality, it had been restructured with a portion redirected to programs labeled as environmental research, deep space geology, and long-range communications infrastructure. None of those labels were entirely false. They just weren't entirely complete. Earth's warships, if you wanted to call them that, were being built in dry docks on the dark side of the moon, behind sensor arrays calibrated to the exact detection frequencies used by the nearest conclave monitoring stations. Every measurement, every material, every energy output, had been calculated to stay below the threshold that would trigger an automatic report. They weren't weapons ships. They were designed for something more specific: endurance. Any species that had observed humanity's military history would have expected them to build fast, aggressive, high-firepower vessels. The galactic equivalent of a fist. What they built instead were long-range, self-sufficient, heavily shielded exploration and support vessels. Ships that could travel anywhere with the Holt drive, stay for years without resupply, carry enormous cargo, operate with small crews, and sustain damage that would have destroyed most galactic military vessels while still functioning at full capacity. Not a fist. Something more like an outstretched hand. But an outstretched hand with the bone structure of something that had survived a very long time. The lead engineer on the shipbuilding program was a woman named Commander Rachel Torres, ex-Navy, with 2 tours in Earth's last major ocean conflict and a reputation for solving impossible problems by simply refusing to acknowledge they were impossible. She was 47, had 3 boys in school in Arizona, and communicated primarily in clipped sentences and architectural sketches. She walked through the first completed vessel, designated Earthship Endurance, and said nothing for a long time. Just walked. Just looked. Checked welds with her fingers. Looked up at corridor ceilings. Checked pressure seals with a handheld gauge she carried everywhere. Then she turned to her chief engineer and said, "She'll hold." "Sir?" "The ship," Rachel said. "She'll hold. Whatever comes." Her chief engineer looked down the corridor of the most advanced human vessel ever constructed. "What do you think is coming?" Rachel Torres put her pressure gauge away. "Humanity's patience runs out eventually," she said simply. "When it does, I want to make sure we have something worth waiting for." It was a Vreth decision that broke it. Not with a dramatic announcement. Not with an obvious act of cruelty. It was a trade policy filed on a Tuesday, a standard conclave session with a full agenda, several dozen species present, routine resource reviews scheduled. The Vreth Elder Sorvin, who had been chair for so long that junior delegates from species with short lifespans had literally never seen anyone else in that seat, introduced a motion to reclassify the asteroid belt adjacent to Sol System as Vreth Sovereign Resource Territory. The asteroid belt adjacent to Sol System was, for anyone unfamiliar with the geography, Earth's asteroid belt. The one that human mining operations had been working for 40 years. The one that provided raw materials for approximately 30% of Earth's industrial output. The one that humanity had mapped, cleared, cataloged, and developed entirely through their own labor, with their own people, over their own 4 decades of sustained effort. The Vreth had never gone near it. Their argument was simple and, by conclave law, technically valid. Humanity was not a full member. They held observer status only. Observer status did not include territorial rights under the conclave charter. The asteroid belt existed in unclaimed galactic space. The Vreth were claiming it. The motion passed. 19 species voted in favor. 4 abstained. 3 voted against. All of them species in observer status themselves, whose votes carried no official weight. Humanity's representative, who was now a young man named David Chin, because Dara Holt had come home the previous year to brief the World Council directly, raised his hand to speak. He was told he could submit a written objection. Written objections from observer status delegations were reviewed quarterly. The next quarterly review was in 4 months. David Chin sat down. He did not show what he was feeling. He had been trained by Dara Holt personally, and one of the things she had trained him to do was exactly this: to sit down and show nothing. He sent one coded message back to Earth. It happened. Elena Vasquez received the message in her office in Bogotá at 3:17 in the morning. She had been expecting it for 2 years. She and Dara had discussed in exhaustive detail what the trigger event would look like, not whether it would happen but what form it would take. Both of them had understood, with the clear-eyed certainty of people who had studied the conclave long enough to know its patterns, that the Vreth would eventually make a move on human-adjacent territory. Because that was what dominant powers did. Because the conclave structure invited it. Because humanity had been sitting quietly in row 19 without pushing back for 5 years, and in the language of galactic politics, quiet compliance was often read as consent. Elena sat with the message for exactly 6 minutes. Then she made 3 calls. The first was to James Okafor. "How many ships?" 17 completed, James said. He was awake, he was always awake. 12 more within 90 days. The Holt drive, how reliable? 100% on unmanned tests. 97.4 on manned simulations. We'll hit 99 within the month. Elena wrote a number on her notepad. I want 30 ships operational within 60 days. James was quiet for a moment. Yes. We can do that. The second call was to Commander Rachel Torres. How soon can Endurance fly? She's ready now, Rachel said, and Elena could hear the pride in it. She's been ready for 3 months. The third call was to Dara Holt. Dara answered on the first ring, which meant she hadn't been sleeping either. You've seen the message, Elena said. Yes, Dara said. Is it time? There was a pause. Not a hesitant one, a precise one. The pause of a person who has thought about this moment for 5 years and wants to make sure, in the final second before it arrives, that they are thinking about it correctly. Not yet, Dara said. Elena blinked. They've taken our asteroid belt. I know. 30% of our industrial supply. I know, Elena. Another pause. Then when? Elena said. We don't respond to what they just did, Dara said. We respond to what they're going to do next. When they think we've accepted this, when they believe we've folded, they'll go further. They'll move on the outer planets. They'll propose reclassifying the entire Sol sector as a development zone, which under conclave law means open access for any full member. Elena was very still. If we respond now, Dara continued, we look reactive. Emotional. Exactly what their assessment said we were. But if we wait, if we let them make the next move, and then we respond, we look like something else entirely. What? Elena asked. Dara's voice was very quiet. Very even. We look like something that has been waiting, she said. And there is nothing in this universe more frightening than a species that has been waiting and finally decides to stop. They didn't wait long. The Vreth, emboldened by the asteroid belt decision and the absolute silence from the human delegation, submitted a new motion 8 weeks later. Motion 7741C, reclassification of Sol sector as Galactic Development Zone. Under this motion, the entire Sol system, including Earth's moon, Mars, where humanity now had a colony of 6,000 people, and every other body in the solar system, would be open to resource extraction by any full conclave member. Earth itself would be classified as a protected inhabited world, which sounded kind until you read the footnotes, which specified that protection meant full members could not remove the population but could access all non-inhabited surface and subsurface resources. Basically, they could mine Earth. They just had to leave the humans standing on it. The motion was scheduled for vote in 6 weeks. Dara Holt boarded a ship for Calith Prime the next morning. She had been home for 11 months. She had spent those months doing exactly 3 things: briefing the World Council, visiting her sister in Portland, and having very long conversations with a man named Thomas who ran a small bookshop and who had, in the months before she left, started looking at her the way people look at something they're not ready to lose. She told Thomas she had to go. He nodded. He had always known this was going to happen. He handed her a book, a small one, worn paperback, Meditations by Marcus Aurelius, and said, for the long flights. She put it in her jacket pocket. She didn't cry until she was on the shuttle and the lights of Portland were small and far below her. Then she stopped crying, opened the book, and started reading. She was going back to row 19. But not for long. The day Dara Holt returned to the conclave, she did not go to row 19. She walked into the chamber as she always had, alone, in her standard diplomatic attire, the notepad under her arm. She nodded to the security staff. She nodded to the clerk who managed session records. She found her seat. Row 19. Far left. She sat down and arranged her things exactly as she always did. Notepad open. Pen ready. Expression composed. What no one in that chamber knew, what no monitoring system had detected, what no intelligence report had flagged, was that at this precise moment, 30 Earth ships had just exited Holt drives at 17 different locations around Calith Prime. Not in orbit. Not visible on approach. Not broadcasting any signals. Just there. Sitting quietly in space. Not threatening. Not demanding. Not doing anything that required an immediate response. Just there. Rachel Torres commanded the Endurance from the bridge, a cup of actual coffee in her hand, the real stuff from a small farm in Colombia, because she had decided that if this was going to be a historic moment, she was going to drink good coffee during it. All ships in position? She asked. Her communications officer, Lieutenant J. Park, 28 from Seoul by way of Houston, who had joined the program straight out of the Aerospace Academy, checked his board. All 30, Commander. Silent running. No active sensors. No weapons hot. Good, Rachel said. She sipped her coffee. Keep it that way. We're not here to scare anyone. Then what are we here for? Jay asked. He was young enough that the question was genuine. Rachel looked out at the stars around Calith Prime, the crystalline conclave chamber visible in the distance, refracting light the way it always did. We're here so the ambassador doesn't have to sit in row 19 anymore, she said. Inside the chamber, the session had begun. Sorvin was in the chair as always. The agenda moved through its preliminary items: procedural motions, attendance confirmations, reading of the previous session's minutes. Motion 7741, C was listed as the day's primary item. Dara waited. When the time came, when Sorvin said in his grinding stone voice, "The conclave will now consider motion 7741C, the reclassification of the Sol sector as Galactic Development Zone," Dara stood up. From row 19. Far left. "Point of order," she said. Sorvin looked at her. The room looked at her. She was, to virtually every being in that chamber, the same unremarkable human diplomat who had been sitting in that row for 5 years, writing things in a notepad, occasionally asking procedural questions that went nowhere. Observer status delegations, Sorvin said, do not have floor rights during primary motion consideration. I'm aware of the charter, Dara said. Section 12, Clause 4. Any observer delegation may request floor rights during a motion that directly affects its home territory, with the seconding of 3 full members. Sorvin stared at her. I have 3 seconds, Dara said. The chamber was very quiet. Kale, the Pelori representative, raised his hand. He had full member status. The Pelori had finally been admitted the previous year, after Dara had spent 3 sessions quietly and methodically dismantling the procedural barriers that had kept them in observer status for over a century. Mirith, the Den ambassador, raised a fin. Full member status. Admitted 6 months ago, after Dara had commissioned and distributed to every full member a new translation system, built specifically for Den harmonic communication, which had been enough to make their actual policy positions comprehensible for the first time. Comprehension had led rapidly to respect. Then the Oru network pulsed a soft bioluminescent acknowledgement from their section of the chamber. Full member status. Admitted 4 months ago, after Dara had proposed and pushed through a procedural rule change allowing extended response windows for slow communication species. 3 seconds. All of them species that had been in observer status when Dara arrived. All of them now full members because of things she had done quietly over 5 years that had nothing to do with human interests and everything to do with basic fairness. The silence in the chamber was different now. It wasn't the comfortable silence of a body that knows what is going to happen. It was the silence of a room that has just realized it doesn't know. Sorvin said, "Floor rights are recognized." Dara walked down from row 19 for the first time. She walked all the way to the center of the chamber, to the speaking floor, the circular space that only full members ever used, and she stood there and she looked out at 600 years of galactic power that had never, not once, taken her seriously. She let the silence hold for exactly 5 seconds. Then she said, "My name is Ambassador Dara Holt. I represent the people of Earth, and I am here to inform this body that effective immediately humanity is withdrawing its observer status application." The murmur that went through the chamber was something her translator couldn't quite capture. It was too many overlapping species reactions at once. Confusion. Surprise. And, from the Vreth section, something she recognized even through the translator's imperfect rendering, the beginning of satisfaction. They thought she was quitting. "We are not withdrawing from the conclave," Dara continued. "We are informing the conclave that we are no longer applying for observer status because we are no longer willing to be observers." She opened her notepad to the last page. "Humanity is hereby applying for full membership. Under Charter Section 7, a full membership application must be considered within 90 days of submission and cannot be tabled more than once." She looked up. "We have all the documentation ready. We have had it ready for 2 years. We were waiting for the right moment to submit it." Sorvin leaned forward. "A membership application requires demonstrated technological independence, FTL capability, and—" "Yes," Dara said. "We have all of those things." The chamber was very still. "Show us," said a Koth delegate from the main floor. Not Thessaly, a senior one. Skeptical, flat voice. Dara reached into her jacket pocket. Next to Meditations by Marcus Aurelius, she carried a small communications device. Standard human diplomatic tech, nothing that had ever drawn attention. She pressed a button. On the chamber's main display, the enormous crystal screen that showed space around Calith Prime, 30 blips appeared simultaneously. 30 human ships, decloaking from silent running, arranging themselves in a slow, deliberate formation around the station. Not a threatening formation. Not weapons aimed, not shields raised. Just present. Visible. Undeniable. There in the darkness like stars that had always been there, patient, waiting to be seen. The chamber did not erupt. It went more still. The particular stillness of many different species, with many different biologies and many different threat response systems, all arriving at the same conclusion simultaneously. These people have been building. This whole time they have been building. Those are FTL-capable vessels, said the Koth senior delegate. It was not a question. Yes, Dara said. Full drives? No, Dara said. Something better. We call them Holt drives. They're faster than full drives by a factor of approximately 3, and they don't require Cathite. The Koth delegate went very still. Because the Koth controlled most of the Cathite trade routes. Had controlled them for 200 years. Had built an enormous portion of their economic and political leverage on the fact that without Cathite, you couldn't travel fast, and without fast travel, you couldn't be a power. That's not possible, the delegate said. And yet, Dara said, here we are. She looked around the chamber. I want to be clear about something, she said. Her voice had not changed. It was the same calm, measured tone she had used from row 19 for 5 years. The tone that some in the chamber had interpreted as meek, as resigned, as the voice of a species that had accepted its place. We are not here to threaten anyone. We are not here to demand anything that isn't ours. We are applying for full membership because we have met every requirement, and we have met them while sitting in row 19, writing things in a notepad, being told our written objections would be reviewed quarterly. She paused. We are here because our asteroid belt, the one that humanity mapped, developed, and operated for 40 years, was voted into Vreth territory 2 months ago by a body we had no voting rights in. And we are here because 8 weeks after that, a motion was submitted to open our solar system to extraction by species who have contributed nothing to it and whose only qualification for access is that they hold a category of membership that this body has systematically blocked us from achieving. She was looking directly at Sorvin now. We have been patient, she said. We have been patient in a way that I think this body did not expect and perhaps did not believe was possible from a species your own assessment described as emotionally unstable and historically violent. She put the notepad down on the speaking floor. We have not been violent. We have been watching. We have been learning. We have been building. And now we are here and we are asking one final time to be treated as equals. The silence was extraordinary. Sorvin spoke. His voice was very controlled. You said you are asking. One final time. Yes, Dara said. And if the answer is no? Dara Holt looked at the 30 ships on the main display. She looked at the Pelori ambassador and the Den ambassador and the soft pulsing light of the Oru. She looked at young Thessaly, who was sitting at the Koth table now with the expression of someone watching history happen and wanting to be on the right side of it. She looked back at Sorvin. Then we will leave, she said. All of us. Humans, Pelori, Den, Oru, and every species currently in observer status that we have spoken to over the past 5 years, approximately 31 of them, who have agreed in principle to exit the conclave simultaneously and form an alternative body with different membership requirements. One that doesn't require the approval of the species who benefit most from excluding you. The chamber broke. Not into chaos. Into the specific, controlled explosion of hundreds of species all reacting at once. A wall of sound that the translator in Dara's earpiece could not fully process, rendering it as a kind of overlapping tide of alarm and calculation and, from some corners, something that sounded almost like wonder. Because this was the thing about humanity that no assessment had captured. They had not just been building ships. They had not just been building drives. They had been building something that no military force, no technological achievement, no act of aggression could have built. They had been building friends. Sorvin called a recess. 20 minutes. Standard conclave procedure when a session reached an impasse requiring reflection. It had been invoked hundreds of times in 600 years. It had never felt until today like it had the weight of an actual decision in it. In the side chamber where Dara waited, Thessaly found her. He was alone. No aids. He had come quickly, she could tell by the way his feathers were slightly disheveled, which for a Koth with his composure was the equivalent of showing up out of breath. Ambassador Holt, he said. Thessaly, she said. She offered him a seat. He took it, which surprised her. He was a junior delegate who had become a senior attaché in the years she'd been gone, and his coming here without his seniors knowing was a political risk. I need to ask you something, he said. Ask. The alternative body, he said. The one you described. Is it real? Is it genuinely already organized? Dara looked at him for a moment. Does it matter? For my decision, yes. She studied him. He had always been the one Koth diplomat who had treated her as worth paying attention to, who had sat next to her in row 19 and asked questions, who had, she suspected, spent the past 5 years watching her work and coming to conclusions that his seniors had not. It's real, she said. We have 31 observer status species in preliminary agreement. We have a charter drafted. We have a location selected for the founding session. She paused. We hoped we wouldn't need to use it. Thessaly was quiet. Then, the Koth benefits significantly from Kathite trade. Yes, Dara said. If Kathite is no longer required for FTL travel. That's correct, Dara said. Then our leverage changes. Considerably, Dara agreed. Thessaly looked at his hands. Koth hands were four-fingered, slender, built for fine manipulation. My seniors believe the Vreth will push through the soul sector motion and that humanity will protest and eventually accept. They're wrong, Dara said. I know, Thessaly said. I've been trying to tell them. They do not listen to junior attaches. He looked up. But they might listen to full member species who vote against the motion. Dara was very still. Koth policy, she said carefully, is not my business to influence. No, Thessaly agreed. But you spent 5 years making things fair for species that were being excluded. You didn't do that to build a coalition, or at least that wasn't all you were doing. You did it because it was right. He looked at her directly, all 4 eyes. I have been watching you for 5 years, Ambassador. You are the most honest diplomat I have ever seen. And I think you would tell me right now, honestly, if the vote goes against humanity today, do you use the 30 ships? The silence held. No, Dara said. We leave. We build the alternative body. And in 20 years, when it's larger and stronger than the Conclave, we invite the Conclave to join us. Thessaly stood. Then you will win, he said, whether you win today or not. He smoothed his feathers. I am going to speak to my seniors. He left. Dara sat alone in the side chamber with Marcus Aurelius in her pocket and her empty notepad on the table. She thought, 11 years ago James Okafor saw a crayon rocket and solved faster-than-light travel. 5 years ago I sat in row 19 and decided to wait. Somewhere in a bookshop in Portland, a man named Thomas is wondering if I'm okay. She thought, we have been patient for so long. Let it be over soon. One way or another, let it be over soon. The recess ran 40 minutes instead of 20. When the conclave reconvened, the atmosphere was different. Not louder, actually quieter. The kind of quiet that means something has shifted and everyone knows it but no one wants to acknowledge it first. Sorvin took his chair. He sat for a moment looking at the 30 ships still visible on the display. Then he said, in his grinding stone voice, the conclave will hear a motion from the floor before proceeding with the primary agenda item. Dara blinked. A Koth senior delegate stood. Not Thessaly, one of the most senior, a statesperson named Vor who had been in the conclave for 40 years and whose vote carried enormous weight. The Koth delegation moves to table motion 7741C indefinitely, Vor said, and to open an expedited review of humanity's full membership application, to be completed within 30 days rather than the standard 90. The chamber absorbed this. Then one by one hands went up. The Pelori. The Den. The Oro. For others. Then 3 more. When the vote on the motion to table was called, it passed. Not by a small margin. By 38-9. Sorvin looked at the result for a long time. Then he looked at Dara Holt, who was still standing on the speaking floor, still holding her notepad, still wearing the same calm expression she had worn in row 19 for 5 years. The motion passes, he said. The soul sector reclassification is tabled. Humanity's membership application will be reviewed on an expedited basis. He paused. Ambassador Holt, he said. Yes, Chair Sorvin. Another pause. Longer than any he had taken in 200 years of chairing. You may take a seat at the main table, he said. Pending review, your delegation is accorded provisional full member status. Dara nodded once. She picked up her notepad. She walked to the main table, the one that 600 years of decisions had been made around without human hands, and she sat down. She opened her notepad to a new page. She wrote the date. Then she looked up at the chamber, at the crystal ceiling refracting light in colors Earth had no names for, and she thought about Lily Okafor's crayon rocket. About 30 ships sitting quietly in the dark. About Thomas in his bookshop. About Marcus Aurelius, who had once written that the object of life is not to be on the side of the majority, but to escape finding oneself in the ranks of the insane. She thought about all the people who had told her, in one way or another, that patience was weakness. None of them had ever been human. The news reached Earth in a burst transmission from Calith Prime. It arrived at 4:22 in the morning, Bogota time. Elena Vasquez was awake. She had been awake for 31 hours, sitting in her office with her senior staff and a collection of cold coffee cups, following the conclave session through the diplomatic feed. When the vote result came through, when the 38-9 appeared on her screen, she made a sound she would later describe to her daughter as embarrassingly undignified. Her senior staff, who had also been awake for 31 hours, mostly just leaned on each other and breathed. One of her aides, a young man named Priya, started crying without seeming to notice. Elena sat for a moment. Then she stood up and went to her office window and looked out at Bogota waking up in the gray before dawn. Lights coming on in buildings, the first traffic beginning on the streets below, somewhere a bakery opening because she could smell it, that specific early morning smell of bread being made before the city woke up enough to need it. She thought about all the people down there who had never heard of the Galactic Conclave, who had gone to sleep last night worried about rent, about school, about what to make for dinner, who had built lives that were complete and whole and mattered enormously, in the small and specific way that ordinary lives always do. She had done this for them. All of it. The strategic patience. The classified shipbuilding. The 5 years of Dara sitting in a chair that was the wrong shape for a human body and writing everything down in a notepad. She had done it so that the people in those buildings, the ones who smelled the bread and hadn't thought about the stars since they were children, would have a future that didn't belong to someone else. Her communicator buzzed. A text from James Okafor. Lily says she wants to be an ambassador. I told her she should be. J. Elena smiled. She typed back, tell her the good news travels faster than light now. On Lagrange Station, James Okafor sat in his lab in front of the whiteboard where Lily's rocket had lived for years. The drawing was worn now, the crayon had faded, and the edges were soft from being handled and repinned so many times. He'd replaced the tape once. He should probably take it down, get it framed. He didn't take it down. Sophia came in with actual coffee, not station coffee, not cold coffee, but proper coffee she'd been hoarding from a care package her family had sent. She put a cup down in front of him without saying anything. He took it. Sip. Holt drives, he said. Yes, Sophia said. She sat across from him. They named them after her. She doesn't know that yet. She will. Sophia looked at the whiteboard. You know this is just the beginning. The drive, the ships. This is year one of something very long. I know, James said. It doesn't bother you? That we may not live to see where it goes. James thought about that. He thought about the 80-year human lifespan that the Vretha's assessment had called a weakness. He thought about the specific fire that burns in a creature who knows its time is limited. He thought about everything humanity had built, always, in the knowledge that the builder would not see the building finished. We built cathedrals, James said finally. Sophia looked at him. Humans, he said. Hundreds of years ago. We built cathedrals that took 200 years to finish. The people who laid the first stone never saw the ceiling go up. The people who painted the ceiling never knew who dug the foundation. He looked at Lily's rocket. We have always been a species that builds things larger than one life. Sophia was quiet for a moment. That's beautiful, she said. Don't tell anyone, James said. It'll ruin my reputation as a physicist. Sophia laughed. Which was rare enough that James counted it. Rachel Torres received the news on the bridge of the Endurance. She had been drinking her good Colombian coffee and watching the stars around Calith Prime on the view screen when Jay Park turned from his console and said very quietly, Commander. The vote passed. Rachel did not stand up. She did not cheer. She sat in her command chair and looked at the conclave chamber in the distance, crystal and light, 600 years of decisions. How many of our people know? She asked. Bridge crew heard it when I did, Jay said. Good. She set down her coffee. Jay, get me ship-wide. He opened the channel. Every speaker on every deck of every one of the 30 ships. Rachel Torres took a breath. This is Commander Torres, she said. The conclave vote has passed. Humanity has been accorded provisional full member status, effective immediately. She paused. You are the crew that made this possible. Not just today, every hour you spent building, every simulation you ran, every night you slept on a cot in a shipyard and told your family you were doing geological research. You made this possible. She looked out at the stars. We are going home, she said. And then we are going everywhere else. She closed the channel. Then, alone on the bridge with her crew, she raised her coffee cup. No one else had coffee. They raised whatever they had: water bottles, tablets, a pen, one engineer in the back who raised an empty hand because he'd already finished his water. It didn't matter. HFY, Rachel said quietly, a phrase she'd picked up from a human culture briefing, one of hundreds she'd studied, trying to understand all the people she was flying for. From now on for me. From now on for all of us. The 30-day expedited review was not without opposition. The VREF, to no one's surprise, contested every section of the membership application. They raised procedural objections. They demanded independent verification of the Holt drive's capabilities. They requested that humanity submit to a full military assessment, which was not a standard membership requirement but which they argued should be imposed given humanity's historically documented pattern of conflict. Dara handled each objection the same way she handled everything: thoroughly, patiently, and with documentation that had clearly been prepared in advance. For the Holt drive verification, she invited a panel of conclave scientists, including VREF scientists, to Lagrange Station to observe a demonstration. James Okafor conducted the demonstration personally. The probe went 6 light-years in 0.003 seconds. When it came back, James offered the scientists full access to the non-classified theoretical framework behind the drive. The VREF scientists reviewed the data for 3 days. Their lead scientist, a young VREF who appeared to be, though it was hard to tell, genuinely excited by what she was looking at, submitted her report to Sorvin with a notation that was not required but that she seemed compelled to include: "This is an elegant solution. The stabilization computation is. We did not think of this. We have been using Cathite for 1200 years and we did not think of this." For the military assessment request, Dara submitted a countermotion noting that no other full member had ever been required to undergo military assessment as a condition of membership. The motion passed, narrowly, but it passed. The assessment requirement was dropped. For the procedural objections, Dara simply sat at the main table and answered them one by one, in the same unhurried voice, for as long as it took. On the 28th day, Sorvin called the final session. The chamber was full. Species that rarely attended routine sessions had shown up. Thessaly was there, seated behind the Koth senior delegation, watching with all 4 eyes. Sorvin read the review committee's findings. Humanity met the technological requirements. The Holt drive constituted independent FTL capability. Humanity met the diplomatic requirements. Their network of relationships with observer status species constituted demonstrated engagement with the galactic community. Humanity met the stability requirements. Their governmental structure, while different from most galactic systems, showed sufficient continuity and accountability. Humanity met the peaceful intent requirements. Despite possessing military capability, they had not used it, threatened to use it, or positioned it aggressively at any point during the review period. The review committee recommends, Sorvin said, full membership approval. He put the document down. He looked at Dara. "Is there anything the human delegation wishes to say before the final vote?" he asked. Dara stood. She thought for a moment about all the things she could say. About the 6 years. About Row 19. About the asteroid belt and the crayon rocket in Thomas's bookshop, and every cold morning she had sat in a chair shaped wrong for human bodies and written everything down. "No," she said. "We're ready for the vote." Sorvin nodded. The vote was 44-5. Humanity was a full member of the Galactic Conclave. The 5 votes against were all VREF. After the session ended, as the chamber was emptying and congratulations were being offered from every direction, the Pelori clicking warmly, the Den harmonizing something her translator rendered as deep respect, the Oru pulsing gentle light, Sorvin approached Dara. He stood very close. 9 feet tall. 3 eyes in a triangle on a flat gray face. 600 years of authority. "I voted against," he said. "I know," Dara said. "I want you to understand why," he said. "It was not because I believed humanity was unworthy. I have reconsidered that assessment considerably over the past 6 years. He paused. "It was because I am afraid of you." Dara looked up at him. "Of me specifically?" "Of your kind," Sorvin said. "You are young. You are angry even when you do not show it. You are angry. You have had things taken from you and you have said nothing for a very long time." He looked at her steadily. "I have been in this chamber for 200 years. I have seen species rise. I have seen what happens when a species with grievances finally has power." Dara held his gaze. "What happens?" "Usually," Sorvin said, "they do to others what was done to them." The chamber was almost empty now. Just the 2 of them and the crystal ceiling and the light. "I was afraid of that," Sorvin said. I'm still afraid of that. I voted against because I am afraid of what humanity will do with a seat at this table. Dara was quiet for a long moment. Can I tell you something? She said. Yes. I'm afraid of that too, she said. Every day. I'm afraid that we'll get this seat and in 50 years we'll be exactly what you were to us. That we'll have our own row 19. She paused. That's why we spent 6 years building friendships with the species who don't have power yet, before we had power ourselves. Because it's easy to be kind when it doesn't cost you anything. We wanted to practice when it was hard. Sorvin looked at her for a very long time. If you mean that, he said finally, then you are different. I hope so, Dara said. We're trying to be. She put out her hand. It was a human gesture, one that many galactic species had by now learned to recognize. Sorvin looked at it for a moment. Then he extended one of his 4 hands and took hers. Not a comfortable grip. Not a natural one. But a real one. The world changed. Not all at once. Not dramatically. Not in the way that stories sometimes tell it, where there is a single triumphant moment and then everything is different. It changed the way humanity had always changed things. Slowly at first and then very fast, and then in ways that no one had predicted because the predictions had been made by people who didn't know what humans were capable of when they were finally, genuinely, allowed to try. The first thing Dara did with full voting rights was move to restore the Sol Sector asteroid belt to human operation. The motion passed. No drama. The second thing was to propose a reform to the observer status pathway, a new set of criteria that prioritized demonstrated capability and community contribution rather than existing member approval. The reform passed after a month of debate. 14 species in observer status had their applications fast-tracked. Within 2 years, 11 of them were full members. The third thing was to invite the Vreth Science Council to a joint research program on Holt drive technology. This surprised everyone, including Sorvin. James Okafor led the program. The Vreth scientist who had written the notation about elegance. Her name was Vethis and she was, James suspected, the most brilliant person he had encountered in any species, was her delegation's representative. They argued constantly and productively. The program produced 4 significant advances in FTL theory within 18 months, all of them co-credited to human and Vreth researchers. Caro, Vethis said one day during a break between sessions. She had picked up human words quickly, faster than James had picked up Vreth. This word you use sometimes. Caro. What does it mean? James thought about it. It's complicated, he said. It means something like, let's do this but also, I trust you, and also, what comes next. It's the word you say when you're moving forward with someone. Vethis processed this. Your language is strange, she said. Probably, James agreed. But that is a good word, she said. To move forward with someone. She looked at the equations they had been working on. Caro then. Caro, James said. Rachel Torres got command of a deep exploration mission 2 years after the conclave vote. The Endurance, plus 4 sister ships, each with mixed human and allied species crews, launched from Lagrange Station on a Tuesday in late April, which was a very ordinary day on Earth and an extraordinary one everywhere else. Lily Okafor, who was now 12 and had recently decided she wanted to be a physicist rather than an ambassador, though she kept both options open, sent a drawing for the mission. Not a crayon rocket this time, a proper pen and ink diagram of a Holt drive, annotated with her own calculations, which were not correct but were, according to Sophia Reyes who had been shown the drawing and taken it very seriously, surprisingly sophisticated for a 12-year-old. James had it framed and hung it in his office at Lagrange next to the crayon rocket. Both of his daughters, he thought, sent in their drawings. Rachel took the mission orders and put them in the front pocket of her flight jacket. She stood on the bridge of the Endurance with her crew assembled, looked at the view screen showing the Earth and Moon behind them and the galaxy ahead. I've been trying to think of the right thing to say, she told them. Commanders are supposed to say something important at moments like this. She paused. But the truth is we've already said everything that matters. We built it. We waited. We earned this. She looked around at her crew, humans, 2 Pelori who had specifically requested assignment to a human vessel because they wanted to see how humans explored, and a single Den who communicated through harmonic speakers built into their suit. So I'll just say this, let's go see what's out there. She turned to the helm. Caro, she said. The Endurance jumped. 3 years into the deep exploration mission, the Endurance made contact with a species no one in the conclave had ever encountered. They were small, about the size of a large dog, 6-limbed, covered in something that was not quite fur and not quite scale but somewhere in between. Their world was a planet called, in their own language as best the translation systems could approximate, something like Hearth, warm, dense with vegetation, orbiting a orange-yellow star in the far edge of a sector that conclave maps had marked as uninhabited. The conclave maps, it turned out, had not been very thorough. Rachel brought the Endurance into a slow approach orbit and opened communication channels in every standard format humanity and their conclave allies used. Then she waited. It took 6 days to get a response. When it came, it was cautious, untrusting. The beings on Hearth had clearly had encounters before. Their communications carried a wariness that Rachel recognized not as hostility but as something worse, the wariness of a species that had learned to expect the worst. She didn't push. She sent back gentle inquiries. She sent mathematical sequences, universal language, numbers, ratios. She sent images of Earth and of Calith Prime and of Lagrange Station. She sent, on an impulse she couldn't quite explain, a picture of Lily Okafor's crayon rocket. On day 9, one of the Hearth beings, alone, apparently acting without authorization from anyone else, because the communication came in the middle of their night cycle, sent back a single image. Was a drawing. Small, simple, made in something that was not quite ink on something that was not quite paper. 6 limbs. A round body. And next to it, unmistakable in its 6-limbed childish approximation, a rocket. Rachel Torres pressed her hand to the view screen. "Jay," she said. "I see it, Commander," Jay said very quietly. "Give me a communication channel. Direct, personal, not broadcast." He opened it. Rachel sat in front of the communication console. She thought about what to say. About all the words in all the human languages and all the galactic ones she'd been learning. About every first meeting that humanity had ever had with something it didn't understand. She said, "Hello. I see your drawing. We're not here to take anything. We're just here to say hello. And to ask if you'd like to meet." The response took 4 hours. But it came. And that was how humanity made its first new contact as a full conclave member. Not with a show of force, not with a claim of territory, not with an assessment that put a species in a row in the back of a chamber. With a drawing of a rocket. With patience. With an outstretched hand. Back on Calith Prime, the news reached Dara Holt on a morning when she was meeting with Sorvin. They had developed what could charitably be called a working relationship and uncharitably be called two very stubborn beings who had decided that arguing with each other was more productive than ignoring each other. She read the message from Rachel. She set her communicator down. "Good news?" Sorvin asked. "Yes," Dara said. She picked up her notepad. "Very good news." Sorvin looked at the notepad, the one she had carried since her first day in the conclave, the one that now had 6 years of notes in it, everything that had ever been said or decided in that chamber written down in a human hand. "You still use that?" "Always," she said. "You could use a digital recording system," he said. "More efficient." "Probably," Dara agreed. "Then why?" She thought about it. About all the reasons she had started writing things down. About row 19 and the chair shaped wrong for a human body. About keeping a record because no one else was going to keep one for you. "Because writing it by hand means I have to pay attention," she said. "Every word. Every moment. You can't write fast enough to get everything, so you have to decide what matters." She looked at the notepad. "That's made me a better diplomat. Knowing that I can't catch everything, so I have to choose." Sorvin was quiet for a moment. Then slowly he said, "When I said I was afraid of you." "Yes. I was wrong," he said. "Not about the fear. About what I was afraid of." He paused. "I was afraid you would be like us when you had power. I did not consider that you had already been choosing, all along, what kind of power you wanted." Dara looked at him. "HFY," she said. Her Vreth pronunciation was not perfect, but she'd been working on it. The phrase in Vreth was roughly equivalent. "From now on, for me, for all of us." Sorvin was silent for a long time. Then he said something in Vreth that was too fast for her translator. "What was that?" she asked. "It does not translate well," he said. "The closest meaning in Galactic Common is, I hope your children are half as good as you." Dara thought about that. "I don't have children," she said. "I know," Sorvin said. "I was not speaking literally." 40 years later. The Galactic Conclave met in an expanded chamber, rebuilt and enlarged twice since Dara Holt had first stood on the speaking floor. It had a new section now, in the front, where the chairs were designed for multiple species simultaneously. Some had adjustable configurations, some had environmental controls for aquatic or gaseous beings, some were, and this had been a human suggestion pushed through by the human delegation 5 years after full membership, actual comfortable chairs. Designed by a team of ergonomic engineers who had spent an alarming amount of time thinking about what it meant to sit in a room for 6 hours. Row 19 no longer existed. Observer status seating had been eliminated. Every species with a delegation had a seat at the main table. The conclave now had 97 full members. 14 years ago it had been 49. The growth was due entirely to the reformed membership pathway, the one Dara had proposed in her first week with voting rights, and to the fact that human exploration missions had, over 4 decades, made contact with 31 new species and extended membership invitations to every one of them. Not all had accepted. 7 had declined and maintained independent status. Humanity had respected that without comment, maintaining trade relationships and keeping communication channels open, because that was what you did. The current conclave chair was a Pelori, a fierce, quick-moving being named Esali, granddaughter of Kale, who had been in the conclave since before Dara arrived. She had been elected chair 2 years ago, the first non-major power species to hold the position in 300 years. She ran a very good meeting. Dara Holt was 74 years old. She had retired from active diplomacy 8 years ago, after a career that had lasted 4 decades, and that was, by almost any measure, the most consequential diplomatic career in human history. She lived in Portland now, in a house with a garden, with Thomas, who still ran the bookshop, though it was mostly online now because the world had changed, everything had changed, and the bookshop had changed with it. She still had her notepad. Several of them, actually, the originals were in a museum in Geneva. The current one was a new one, bought from Thomas's shop, because she still wrote things down even in retirement. Old habits. She came back to Calith Prime today for a specific occasion. The Galactic Conclave was marking, with what it called a convening of record, the 40th anniversary of humanity's full membership. It was a formal ceremony. The Conclave liked formal ceremonies, though the specific forms had evolved considerably since Sorvin's era. Sorvin was in the chamber. He was very old now, not frail. Vreth didn't go frail the way humans did, but slower. His grinding stone voice had deepened further into something that you felt more than heard. He had been a private citizen for 15 years, having stepped down as chair a decade after Dara's membership vote. He sat in the gallery above the main floor, next to Vethis, who was still conducting research, still arguing brilliantly with James Okafor's students, still saying Caro before beginning any new equation. James Okafor himself was not present. He had died 6 years ago at the age of 77, of a cardiac event that was very fast and that he had been warned about and had not taken seriously enough. His family held a ceremony at Lagrange Station where Lily, Dr. Lily Okafor now, a physicist herself, following the path he'd drawn for her, hung his portrait next to her own drawings. The crayon rocket was framed. The pen and ink diagram was framed. And in the center James. Dara was asked to speak at the convening of record. She had not prepared remarks. She had a notepad and a pen, but she didn't open it. She stood at the center of the chamber, the same spot where she had stood 40 years ago, when 30 ships had appeared on the display, and she had said, in her quiet, steady voice, "We are no longer willing to be observers." She looked out at 97 full-member delegations. At species in chairs that were finally comfortable. At the Pelori chair and the Den delegation and the Orus gentle light. At Vethis, who raised a hand in acknowledgement. At young diplomats, human and otherwise, who had not been born when she sat in row 19. She looked at Thomas, who was in the gallery, white-haired now, still with the same expression she had first fallen in love with, the one that said, "I am paying attention to you specifically, out of all the things in the world." She thought about what to say. 40 years. 30 ships. A crayon rocket. A notepad. She thought about every decision made without human hands. Every border drawn without human input. Every chair shaped wrong. Every written objection reviewed quarterly. She thought about what Sorvin had said, "I was afraid of what humanity would do with a seat at this table." She thought about what humanity had done. She said, "I was told once, before I ever came to this chamber, that patience was weakness. That a species that didn't push back immediately, loudly, and with force was a species that had accepted defeat." She paused. "I want to tell you something about patience. About what it actually is." The chamber was very still. "Patience is not the absence of anger," she said. "Patience is not acceptance. Patience is not weakness." She looked around the room. "Patience is what you do when you are angry and you refuse to let the anger make your decisions. It is the hardest thing a living being can do, to feel something enormous and choose over and over and over again, not to let it make you into something you do not want to be." She put her hands in her pockets. The worn paperback wasn't there anymore. Thomas had framed it, the copy of meditations he'd given her, but she felt the shape of where it had been. Humanity was patient for a long time, she said. We sat in row 19. We wrote things down. We built in secret because we were not trusted with the open air. We made friends carefully, slowly, with the species that had the least and gave the most. She looked at Sorvin in the gallery. And then we stopped being patient, she said. Not because our patience ran out. Because we had done what patience was for. We had built something worth being impatient about. She looked back at the chamber. 40 years ago, I stood here and told this body that we were no longer willing to be observers. And this body, this remarkable, complicated, 600-year-old body, listened. Not easily. Not without fear. Not without the specific difficulty of changing a structure that had benefited the powerful for as long as it existed. She paused. But it listened. She let that sit. HFY, she said quietly. From now on, for all of us, that is what it means. Not just for humans. Not just for the species that finally got seats at this table. For every species that is somewhere out there, right now, drawing rockets in whatever medium they draw in, dreaming of something larger than the world they're standing on. She looked at Asali in the chair. Caro, she said. The Pelori chair raised her hand in acknowledgement. And then, from the chamber, not organized, not planned, not in any galactic protocol, something began. A sound. Different from every species, in every register and frequency and form, overlapping and distinct and nothing like harmony in any technical sense. But unmistakably the same thing. Agreement. Recognition. The sound of 97 species, shaped by every different evolutionary path the galaxy had produced, arriving at the same moment simultaneously. The moment when humanity's patience had finally, fully, completely become something that could not be taken back. That night, Dara sat on the observation deck of the human diplomatic facility, which was no longer modest and no longer in the developing nations quarter, but still had the same view of the stars she had first looked at 35 years ago. Thomas brought her tea. He sat next to her without speaking. They had been together long enough that silence was comfortable, which was the best kind of silence. She had her notepad. She wrote. Day 1 40 years ago, row 19. Far left. Today, center of the room. She thought about everything between those two lines. About James and Sophia and Rachel and Lily. About Thessaly and Kale and Mirith and the Auror's quiet light. About Sorvin shaking her hand. About a six-limbed being on a warm planet called Hearth, sending back a drawing of a rocket in the middle of their night. About Thomas handing her a worn paperback at a shuttle terminal and not asking her to stay because he understood, had always understood, that she had to go. Are you tired? Thomas asked. Yes, she said. Honestly. Good tired or bad tired? She looked at the stars. At a galaxy that was 40 years on genuinely different because of things that humans had done, not with force, not with aggression, not by becoming what they had every reason to become, but by waiting and building and choosing over and over and over again to be patient. Good tired, she said. The best kind. She closed the notepad. She leaned her head on Thomas's shoulder. Outside, the stars held all of it. The 30 ships, the crayon rocket, the row 19 chairs, the 5-year wait, the 40-year afterward. The conclave and the endurance and the planet called Hearth and the 7 species that had said no thank you and the 89 that had said yes. All of it out there. Permanent. Unchangeable. No species would ever forget the moment humanity's patience finally unleashed its true power. Because the power it had unleashed was not a weapon. It was a table. With enough seats for everyone.